It's time for another episode of Off the Record, On the Rocks. Join Michael Toner and Ankarino Lara and break down the latest news on all things Web3, AI, metaverse, and crypto, filtering out noise and connecting dots as we pour ourselves into the future.
It's a race. This year is about races. Not races like as in creeds and cultures, but like people racing to finish lines.
The space race is definitely on. When this came up on the news, I saw it coming through text threads. It was like kind of prime time moment. It was on the television for the hour leading up to it. They're zooming in on the NASA command center, their countdown clock. You can hear the Alpha 19, they're giving all the keys in. And then the radio silence when this thing went dark, that 15, 30 minutes. Well, this is known after the rover deployed the 360 camera to give the overhead view as it touches down on the lunar landing. We knew we would lose signal. We're just waiting to regain signal. And they're like pinging Australia to like pick up a signal. Turns out it fell over.
It turns out it got one of his three little skinny legs caught on a rock, a moon crater, a rift. The space race is on. Turns out the U.S. is capable of putting junk on the moon, I guess, if it's tipped over, if nothing can right it. I was told that 7, 8, 9 days, the batteries go out. So you have these kind of ironic conclusions to these races, and I hope there's not parallels in the other races that are going on. Like space race to me has this same kind of interesting metaphor with the current accumulation race, right? What is it about 2024 that everyone is trying to race to a finish line before the year is over? This year, the Dragon, we're trying to put people on the moon, supposedly. 50 years ago, drove around Cadillacs, hit golf balls, took photos, planted flags. We can't even drop down a little like water ice detector without knocking it over and wasting everybody's money and time. I don't know. Feels a little strange. But then you look at the same news kind of coming out, the same intensity coming out of these spot Bitcoin ETF markets. That was all we saw going back and forth was how many Bitcoins can these guys accumulate and how fast can they accumulate it? If you would have asked me or you, I think, to guess, I don't think we would have said 300,000 Bitcoins in 3 weeks. I mean, think about that. Just the scale. Does it matter if we're going to the moon anymore? Does it matter if you have all that Bitcoin? Like, how much does it cost in Bitcoin to send a rover to the moon and then knock it over? We should start looking at like the correlation of real, tangible fiat cost.
0.005 Satoshis. Yes, you could send 1 million rockets back and forth to the moon with 300,000 Bitcoin. That is, you're right. The way to start thinking about this. Why is this fast accumulation? Why is there this global narrative around space? It wasn't just us. Even a couple of weeks ago, you were hearing it was China was headed back to the moon. Then you heard Russia. There was news of this space-enabled AI nuclear-capable spacecraft, right? Like the mixing of that narrative of, what is this leaked classified information coming out of this secret meeting on Capitol Hill that the senators were disclosing this information? The big superpowers really flexing that muscle, I think, when it comes to space as the next frontier. And we think about how you're going to fund that and the de-dollarization and each of these countries, needing to transact in their own currency. But when you get to the moon, I think you're going to pay in Bitcoin. I'm pretty sure that's going to be the global currency.
I think if you leave the atmosphere, you gotta transact in crypto. I mean, if you're in the space station, the Mir space station, and let's not, there's a movie that recently came out about the Mir space station. I'm not sure if you've heard it or saw it, but it's a movie which basically is a claustrophobic tale. Let's call it Gravity meets Red Dawn. But the long and the short of it is that while in the International Space Station, all the friendly astronauts who are high-fiving, and here come the Russians and here come these people and who knows, the Indian, the Chinese. I mean, India and Japan have gone to the moon recently, right? So these guys are in there high-fiving. But then they're looking out the window, at the celebration on Earth, and they're like, oh, that's not a celebration on Earth. These are nuclear weapons exploding. There's a full-on global war happening down there. And then all the people in the space station start looking at each other like, what's the protocol? Are we still pals? And of course, next thing you know, everyone's just fighting to the death. So you have, I'm sure Putin saw that movie. I'm sure Putin saw The Creator and he's like, hey, why can't we fly around, a gigantic sort of starship? Maybe it's not the Death Star. Maybe it's not a normal airplane, but something in between, and just start throwing nukes around. That seems pretty doable. So yeah, I think that space, this new frontier, is not only a new frontier for military, but for all of our economics. I mean, if I'm in the Mir space station with you, and we're playing some liar's dice, and I want to make it interesting, I'm not going to start unfurling crumpled up dollar bills I've been sweating in my sleeping bag on all day. I'm actually going to be like, hit my Cash App, and I'm going to transfer some Bitcoin, and we're going to gamble. I feel like as we all decide to basically leave our terraforms behind and find ourselves somewhere between here and the stars, I think Bitcoin is a really good solution to solving that sort of intermediary atmospheric layer. I mean, and maybe that's what will bring it home. Who knows?
Bring it down to earth for just a second. And just literally, there are astronauts in space right now, and they have family. They maybe need to buy a present for their significant other. There is no cash in outer space. They're not sending that cash back. They are using their phone. They are using digital transaction. Shouldn't that money be processed on the blockchain? I don't know. It is crazy to think that the space race and this overall global discussion around the economy and the de-dollarization that we've been talking about for 2 years now, meanwhile, we are reaching, a parabolic moment here in price action with Bitcoin. You're getting accumulation of 300,000 with no slowing down in sight. Why at any point would these big banks not keep buying? Like, why would they not keep buying? And then the other thing that we're conflating is the Bitcoin ETF and the purchase of the Bitcoin. And just to remind our listeners, these two things are completely independent of one another. The SEC told us so, that the only way that these ETFs got approved is that they're actually double fronting the money. So every time I see one of these numbers about the Bitcoin, I also know that what they're stacking up on the other side of the table is the actual cash, the actual US dollars, in order to back the Bitcoin ETF with greenbacks. So there's double money happening.
American dollars, baby. Look, if you're concerned about de-dollarization, then the Bitcoin ETF is for you. It looks like Bitcoin, but it doesn't sound like Bitcoin or act like Bitcoin. Right. And that's where we kind of wondered, right? If you're going to be doing $50 billion in trading volume in I forget the window of time. It's like a week and a half or some insanity. If you're going to do that, then the only way with a straight face you can say it's protected is if you have enough cash. But then at the same time, like you said, those guys are double backing because now they just announced, because it has to be transparent, because cryptocurrency is on the blockchain and therefore is viewable. And there's plenty of people, they call them the watchdogs or the sleuths on the internet, who are watching all this stuff. They're watching BlackRock. They're watching Fidelity. They're watching, ARK, just watching those wallets stack up. And that number, 300,000 Bitcoins in 3 weeks. You know what? I could go ahead and lob in a $2 bill bet that some, if not all, of that recent lunar landing mission was funded by Bitcoin. I mean, we're talking like guys out of JPL and Caltech. And these are guys who aren't, you're running around with wallets full of cash. These are some nerds. These are some Bitcoiners.
Daily net inflows exceed 500 million on Monday as total net inflows reached 6 billion and Bitcoin's price surged less than 2 months after trading began on these newborn spot Bitcoin ETF funds. The 300,000 in assets under management, including Grayscale's converted GBTC fund. So, I mean, they took that GBTC fund, they put it straight into actual Bitcoin and then also stacked the cash up to back the ETF so that they can appease the regulators. But make no mistake, these institutions, these global financial institutions, these staples of the global economy are holding a lot of Bitcoin, not a little amount. I mean, daily inflows 500 million on one day. It's
now,
absurd.
But if you think about that, what gets me is if we were having this conversation, let's just say, a couple of years ago, without kind of knowing the sort of slow roll up that we've had, by most weights and measures, we would say, well, if all these gigantic institutions are going to be coming in, and we just got the number, and are going to be buying up this many hundreds of thousands of Bitcoins, well, then why wouldn't the price of Bitcoin be going just through the ceiling? Because to all retail investors and people like us, and even some of the smaller institutions, the logic is supply and demand. If there is a demand and lots of people are buying it, well, the price is going to go up. And we see that when there are these surges. And then we say, like, what happened? Why did it tank today? Oh, well, FTX debacle, or the Voyager debacle, or the Terra Luna debacle, some debacle. So you might say, well, these spot Bitcoin ETFs are kind of like a debacle, but to the upside. How come we're not seeing it do that, right? It should be sort of the inverse effect. Well, you just said it at the top of the show. They are double backing. So when these giant numbers of inflow are coming in, there actually is a giant amount of outflow going out. Like they're kind of running these like circular pumps, like at a hydro plant. So you're actually accumulating Bitcoin, but in so doing are diluting Bitcoin because of the volume of money that's coming in through the non-Bitcoin product. It's a derivative market classic play. It's how they say how you tame the market. So instead of Bitcoin going from 40 to 100 in 3 weeks, it goes from 40 to 57 or whatever the numbers are, right? You're finding a way to make it optically look like this is a normal investment product. This isn't a YouTube video. What's up, YouTubers? You want to make 10,000x on the new hot coin? And like all the emojis come in. This is actually like, well, listen, we're just a bunch of sober bankers, and we're going to have 9 different funds. We'll convert a few of those funds. How many millions? Okay, we'll get that many more going this way. And they just start playing the numbers on the sheet so they can just, I'm not going to say manipulate, but let's just say they are controlling a steady growth, which is normally not, you're not able to do that when you're talking about technology that doesn't have a company or a human making decisions. So the government's very shrewd here, / the banking system, and we're along for a weird ride.
We are along for a real ride, and you're already hearing the interested in adding Bitcoin to your product portfolio? Contact your financial advisor today. Visit fidelity.com. I mean, they are.
I just had that conversation with my mom. Yeah. And so, but kind of getting back just to kind of loop it around to, these types of lunar explorations aren't free, right? It feels like we're at a time in our economy.
Going to the moon.
That was my joke. That was my punchline. But it's okay. That's literally it. Where, when everyone's broke, when everyone's in COVID, when everyone's like doom scrolling and just thumbing through all the bullshit and can't see their hand in front of their own face. Well, guess what? Nothing's going to the moon except for Dogecoin. But now that sort of all of that is really behind us, and look, Japan kind of put the flag down first. It was the 20th of January this year when their it was called like the Slim Rover or something, landed successfully and is doing its thing. India went up there, I want to say the UAE and Russia both had accidents with theirs. Everyone is literally trying to make their moonshot. And it's not cheap. I was just talking to someone who works at JPL about the raw cost and the kinds of NASA grants that are used to develop these things. JPL being in Southern California, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, works with Caltech, which is the college. And all the employees of JPL are Caltech employees. And JPL is funded, and the materials, the books, the pencils, the rovers by NASA. Are they using dollars? It's a question, because they don't ever say. NASA doesn't ever talk about that. And then the other kind of weird thing that came up in the conversation, which is a whole other sideways thing, but gets us back to the military and maybe the idea of nukes in space and whatever, Reagan's Star Wars was supposed to be back in those days, is that now there's this question of, well, if you have all of these guys kind of racing to space, like what happens when I don't know, one of our satellites gets knocked out of place because, and it's not going to be because of anything, let's say deliberately antagonistic, but we're going to get into a space where all kinds of really expensive elite hardware that's all kind of orbiting around is going to accidentally get knocked into or destroyed just because everyone is continually shooting things up there and then just leaving it. The space debris story about what we're dealing with up there is something we've been dealing with for 20 years, and it's only getting worse. I think the military is going to have to take a position because we know that today's Air Force basically has that, like, or it's not, it was split off. It's called like Cyber Force or whatever. They're sort of like a Space Force. And Space Force is now responsible for dealing with that plus the internet. And those two things I think are kind of in a collision course, not to keep driving in the metaphor, but we're going to start to collide with other countries in space. And there really aren't rules of engagement written the same way they are on Earth.
And it brings us back to our old pal Elon Musk, who enters all of those discussions, whether it be Dogecoin, space, or global geopolitics. But this is from a couple of weeks ago, and I don't think we talked about it. The accusation around Elon Musk's Starlink being used to either subvert or provide satellite access to the Russian army. I don't know if you caught some of this, and he vehemently denied it and said that he's a U.S. based company, and it is really interesting when all of a sudden a private company, an individual person, seemingly has decision-making power that could impact a military's ability because of these satellites. And so that, we talk about these new wars being fought, and every time I say not to make light of it, but it's, in the metaverse. And part of that, yes, has got to be this arms race to the moon, which represents and flexes the muscle around satellites and connectivity and new networks and how we interact and how we send money. And then this AT&T outage last week, we never really got a straight answer about that, but we were hearing from Christopher Wray, FBI director, was on Capitol Hill not more than 10 days prior, shouting about the fear, uncertainty, and doubt around critical infrastructure and China's interest in cyber hacking and taking down these critical infrastructure, these nodes, these points, these networks, and what would that look like? The chaos that would ensue. I wasn't a part of that AT&T outage. I don't think that they've actively described it as any kind of cyber attack, so I don't want to misrepresent it, but damn, the timing on that seems like that's probably what it was.
Yeah, and then also, of course, my conspiracy theory, hat slightly off the side of the head thinks, well, if you're in the business of trying to secure more grants in the interest of national security, everyone's favorite two words to try to get the most money out of the government interest would be, well, what if AT&T kind of hacked itself from the inside? You take yourself down to highlight the reason why it's so important to get more money and funding in for this kind of security. But just to bring it back to Musk for a second, I mean, talking like the way you just did about Musk reminds me of a certain Tony Stark in a certain movie franchise called Iron Man, where you have basically a private citizen who is wildly smart and rich and creative, who is basically just funding wars around the globe when you first meet him. And of course, then finds his benevolent side later on. And I can't remember all the story arcs, but that whole story about Musk and Russia is right. Like, it's right palpable because he was just walking around in the last 2 years since this conflict in Ukraine, because he was going to provide the Starlink, support. So for information and intelligence for the Ukrainian army. Well, if you can just go and set up these little tripods with those little solar flare things, it look like almost little lunar landing things. I wonder if you could put those on the moon. I don't know. But you have those things, and suddenly you have not a dark web, but like a private web, but a gigantic one. And if that has a price tag on it, and that price tag is not in dollars, well, then anybody in theory could kind of get a hold of one. And if you're telling me that the Russians didn't march into some of those towns and grab a few of those and check them out, it's hard to imagine how those are all just those little tripods are just sitting there nice and safe.
What was the company that we talked about that Elon Musk had secretly filed some of that paperwork to make them like non-asset securities? Remember, we found this from a couple months ago, and when you just said Starlink and you sort of create your own private internet, even though it's global, I went to full decentralization of the only way that put my Elon Musk hat on for a moment. The only way he would go down that path is if you could fractionalize the ownership of those nodes, the physical hardware nodes. When we talk about Bitcoin and the nodes and the decentralization of these networks, doesn't that make sense that you could have a publicly traded company, you could fractionalize the ownership, and by buying the piece of hardware, you in effect are a shareholder in this private network that can talk to each other over the airwaves, or you could transact to the astronaut on the moon if you wanted to, because I think you could drop them off on the moon. I mean, I don't remember what the company was, but that makes sense. I forget the
company's name, but I'm sure it might be hanging under SpaceX in some way, shape, or form. But I mean, again, SpaceX is billed as a transportation and satellite internet company. Like it's never listed as it's just very general. It's transportation and satellite based internet, right? But satellite based internet is a little bit of a misnomer in the sense that we want to split some hairs here. Satellite doesn't necessarily mean has to be floating around in space. Like you said, satellite and node, a satellite office, a node, a different node, they're kind of synonyms in that way. So when you think about these things, you look at their design, and you look at the design of the Japanese, the Slim rover, these things all just kind of have that funky little, Star Wars episodes 1, 2, and 3, little tripod droid, looks to them. They're you could easily see some drop ship coming down and just dropping off thousands of these things that then create an instant network. And hey, if your Neuralink that I have implanted right here is now also kind of like has guest access to that network, then I always have a HUD through my monocle wherever I roam that these satellites happen to live. And the satellites could be in space, they could be on the surface of the moon, or they could be in the battlefield. And it changes the narrative in terms of what you think of space exploration. It's space and internet and data exploration, really.
And all the things that run on that internet and data, including financial transactions, as well as, business, commerce, all of the other things. But it just continues to reinforce for me that this is where there is a geopolitical race right now to win on all of these different technological fronts. That there are kind of three giant fronts taking shape. All of them have been on different courses and trajectories. The internet kind of being the one. We talked about this in the last episode, the 3 chapters of the internet coming into this new chapter, this ownership chapter that redefines what digital assets are, tokenizations of assets. That would be kind of the second big technology, the blockchain piece that has really taken the last 10, 15 years to get to 300,000 Bitcoins held by global financial institutions, and then layer in the AI. And no kidding, as I typically do before episodes, I check in on Gary Gensler's Twitter page. There is a new office hours with Gary Gensler up on YouTube from 5 hours ago titled AI. So what is the SEC trying to talk about? They are trying to talk about artificial intelligence. It is the existential crisis to all of those networks, because if you can train the AI, then you could subvert those other systems. And it's a crazy time.
He knows that. And there's an interesting dovetailing here where from some of the names of crypto disasters past, let's talk about our pal CZ, who's the head of Binance, and Do Kwon, who was the head of Terra Luna. Just to kind of catch everybody up, both of these guys were basically seized, I guess, their human form was physically captured, each one in a different part of the world. I want to say sort of Do Kwon famously was in Montenegro trying to live out his last days in a James Bond film or whatever. But now he was, it's like, oh, well, South Korea obviously is going to take Do Kwon back, because he'll be extradited there. He's a South Korean citizen and that's how we'll do it. And, CZ in Canada and whatever, he's Canadian. And the U.S. said, nope, no, guys, not so fast. We have, Gary, why don't you go ahead and provide us some of the current grievances we have against these guys? And now both these dudes are getting extradited to the United States. They got their passports taken away. The latest I heard was that Do Kwon could be here like sometime in March. And now you're talking about Do Kwon in March. What else is happening in March and April? Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX. What else is currently happening and will still be happening? Old Donnie Trump. This spring, after spring break, we're going to have the real-time courtroom drama that's going to make CSI and whatever other those crazy like CBS night shows on law stuff, Law and Order, just look like Mickey Mouse games. And everyone posturing and positioning, trying to, I guess, avoid jail time and likely try to pay exorbitant fees once again to the SEC and the U.S. government to kind of keep their freedom. So you want to talk about a triple shakedown? They're going to not only get FTX, they're now going to get Sam Bankman-Fried. They're not only seizing assets of Terra Luna, now they're going to get Do Kwon. They're going to hold them by their ankles and shake out every coin they have in their pockets. And it's all going to be done on our soil.
It's wild.
It's all going to be our money. And when all those other countries are like, hey, what about our share? We're like, I can't hear you. And we're going to keep moving.
And they're going to sell off the rest of it. And these guys are going to pump it all back into the ETF, rebuy it back on the other side, keep the price nice and smooth. Not financial advice. Please talk to your financial advisor. But Terraform Labs co-founder Do Kwon, who's been in Montenegro since his arrest in March 2023, will reportedly be extradited to the U.S. to face fraud charges. The High Court in Podgorica, I don't know where this is, obviously in Montenegro, reportedly rejected a request to extradite Kwon to South Korea. So that's really interesting, especially amid, we haven't even talked about we mentioned Ukraine, we mentioned the conflict there. We haven't talked about conflict in the Gaza Strip, but just given the overall geopolitical climate and all the countries that we just talked about, think about that there is one of the big bag holders getting pulled in to the United States, and Montenegro's judge got to decide where he got extricated to. I don't think so. I don't think so.
We talk about the United States government often on our podcast as having the ability to get to anyone, anywhere, at any time. And look, I got relatives in the military. I got relatives in the FBI. I got stories, and it is like, as much as it seems insane to be true, it is like it is in the movies, where eventually the helicopters come in low, the ropes come, the guys come zipping down the ropes, the doors get kicked in, and you just get taken away. And I mean, look, we had a place called Guantanamo that was supposed to have been shut down decades ago, and that still runs. No one talks about it, but the idea that these guys are going to be free citizens or free to do what they want at any point in the future without paying some massive penalties. And I like your bet on that, which is like, what if it's, hey, Do Kwon, you can either pay, $2 billion or just put $1 billion into the ETF. Like, you can decide. We'll give you a 50% cut on your charge. Just put it in the BlackRock. Then we'll say it's okay. You can imagine how they manipulated Montenegrin government. I mean, the U.S. just came in and said, there's no way in hell that Do Kwon's going to South Korea. There's just no way. He's coming here. And Montenegro said, yes. That's just how it goes.
That is
countries
exactly
just
how
say
it went down.
Yes.
I can't make sense of it all, but you are right. The spring is going to be fast and furious, not to mention Donald Trump, and the trial playing out. I mean, you mentioned the sort of pure entertainment factor and the distraction that will cause. Meanwhile, you will have the halvening, you will have Do Kwon making payments. Hell, we might have AI regulation from the SEC in time for the halvening. And maybe that's why our Tyler Perry studio down in Atlanta said, well, nobody's going to need any extra entertainment for the next 6 months. We'll just let this drama play out as he backs out of his $800 million investment. I don't know.
That's a beautiful segue. That's a beautiful segue, honestly.
I don't know how I feel about this, though. I mean, the headline reads that he's backing down from this $800 million investment because of fear of AI. We've all seen the Sora AI, cinematic quality videos. They've been pumping out like 10 of these a week, maybe more in the past couple of days. It's not yet available to the public to use Sora, but you're hearing from a lot of media companies, production houses who are fearful that this could, wreck them, that you no longer need a camera to create these visual effects, that you can just do it with text prompts. But at the same time, when I read the headline, the only thing I thought was, damn, he's got an $800 million studio in Atlanta?
Yeah, that's actually what I was thinking too. And I like to segue because that's exactly what we're talking about is AI means so many things to so many different people. We've spoken about this many times on the show. To Gary Gensler, AI goes back 20, 30 years when black box algorithms were allowed to do after hours trading. Like, think about that. There was a decision that was made decades before even people knew how to call it AI, where they allowed non-humans to make trading decisions after hours when the market was closed. Like, just think about sort of the leap today. If you were to say something like that today, people would be like, wait a second, the robots are moving the money at night? No. But of course, now it's normalized, it's commonplace. And we think about AI in the context of Hollywood and entertainment. Well, the number one thing you and I go to, me especially, is, well, we have this writer's strike. Is AI in the writer's room? Oh, it's already in the writer's room. Okay, well then what are the parameters? How do we do attribution? How do you factor ownership, right? Okay. And then it's, well, we all know this costs a lot of money, right? If Sam Altman's trying to get $7 trillion from the UAE, well then Tyler Perry probably pulled together $800 million to build a studio. And if he's going to do that, and someone showed him Sora, I mean, I know it's a nice article because it just sort of positions Sora as being as good as an $800 million studio, which maybe it is, maybe it's not. But suddenly you're like, well, wait a second. The writers and all these guys have kind of worked their stuff out. But now we have cinematographers, videographers, the CapEx managers who acquire all the equipment. Are we using Red Dragon cameras? Are we going to go in the Parallax studio with the Mandalorian with the curved screen? How much does all that cost? Okay, throw it all out, because by the end of this decade, the text prompts are going to be able to really fill in the gaps where all of this industrial light and magic and all this Lucasfilm craziness. There's an entire campus at the Presidio in San Francisco that's dedicated to the industrial light and magic, which has done all the special effects for Star Wars, a few Ghostbusters movies, and a few other random things. And that could literally just turn back into the Presidio. You could put army barracks back in there, because you're going to need one kid with one laptop with a good text prompt and access to every piece of video that's ever been filmed ever. And guess what? I want the perfect shot. Well, we can probably pull 20 or 30 different shots and pull pieces out of it and make an amalgamation and create your perfect shot. And we didn't have to fly to Tunisia.
Yeah. I mean, yes. The fact that, yeah, I mean, the headline of Tyler Perry taking out the studio, taking out the investment. My guess is most studios worth their weight are using these tools when they can. In fact, it might, right, especially right now when there really aren't any rules about the attribution. There isn't guidelines. Maybe you've got some in-house counsel signing off on some attribution model that references the use of AI to create pieces of this, whatever. But it's very unclear in the final mixed media, what's AI generated and what's not. I mean, this kind of came up during the Super Bowl. There were some commercials you just really can't tell right now. And I think that obfuscating of that narrative, talk about black box trading and tricks of the trade. But Hollywood is famous for, there are tricks of the trade, things that can look really expensive.
Movie magic,
exactly. And how they achieve that effect on screen can be very valuable and very expensive to the purchaser, while can be very rudimentary in its actual effect. And I just wonder if the best studios are saying, come to us. We're still doing things with real cameras and real humans and real stuff, whatever. But all the post-processing, all the After Effects, all of the cleanup, all of the rendering of the video. I mean, think about that. Even like color grading, simple stuff that happens inside of Adobe Premiere. Nobody calls that AI. This is becoming a theme. This is now becoming a theme of like some pieces of AI have actually been around for a long time. Like, you don't color grade a movie, or you can you can do it manually, but there are plugins that just will go through the whole thing and clean it up, or audio cleanup, right? All that is AI generated. The best studios in the world use that stuff and sell it to their clients as though it were human created media. That's been happening for a while. So I don't know how I feel about Tyler Perry. He's been doing deep fakes longer than anybody. He's been Medea for a while. So.
That's what I was just going to say. You see his little smug smile in the photo on the article, and it just reminds you, like, let's rewind time back to the 50s and 60s and 70s, the Walt Disney Company. There was a day when, those guys were some badass hand pencil animators. And then one day the computers got good enough to say, we don't need a human to animate every one of these frames. Aladdin, I think, might be one of the original, might be one of the last hand-drawn ones before the computers started coming into play. And of course, the purists thought this is the end of it all. Turns out everyone loves Moana, and Moana's 100% computer generated, and the water looks great. Everyone loves it. Tyler Perry likes to dress in drag and crazy makeup all the time. Now he's like, wait, I don't have to actually go get a wardrobe and put makeup on. I can just be Medea whenever I want. That sounds good to me. And he hit it on the head when he says he was shocked. He said, I think this is not just about actors and writers. This is about the grips, the electricians, the transportation teams, the sound editors, visual editors. Now, like you said, you got your Tommy Cruises of the world. You've got your Christopher Nolans of the world. You've got your James Camerons of the world, who are all about practical stunts. And we're taking the submarine under the water, and we're going to fly to Africa, and we're going to film in the sand dunes, and we're going to use squibs on people's bodies and actually blow holes in their clothes, like Paul Verhoeven did in RoboCop and Total Recall. We're going to go back to that. Like, I want actors getting knocked down when the bullets hit them. Because that now in John Wick, it's just all computer blood and guys flipping upside down wearing motorcycle helmets. There's going to be your auteurs, I'm sure. But man, every one of those guys that I named is an old man. And you got Scorsese in there too, and they're just going to get older, and then they're going to pass on. And there will be a memory of the way that practical movies were made. And it's all going to head towards AI. And maybe in our lifetime, we'll see a renaissance of, let's just get a 16 millimeter camera and shoot a good story, says the director. Maybe we'll see a return to that. But it seems like right now, the wheels have come up. This plane is going, or this rocket is going up, whether it's to the sky, 35,000 feet, or all the way into orbit. It's moving. And if Tyler Perry figured it out and he doesn't have to build out a dozen more sound stages, then I know that NBC and Universal and Warner Brothers, which is just right near here in Los Angeles where I live, they're landlocked. They actually don't have the ability to add sound stages unless they go double decker, which is insane. But now they have the ability to add sound stages because you can shoot in, like they say, like in 20% of a normal hangar, you can shoot an entire show now, where it used to require the whole hangar. If that's the kind of multiples we're seeing in terms of productivity, I mean, I think this is going to be, like I said, this is going to be the decade that redefines entertainment. And the good news is we have a lot of reality TV coming up as it pertains to courtroom dramas playing out, and the presidential election, which we really haven't heard or talked about much because there hasn't been a lot of noise about AI or crypto from the podiums. And
that is exactly where I was going to go to put a nice bow on this, is back around to the real life entertainment. And I mentioned casually the need for AI regulation. We've talked about the political landscape, the election coming up. But I do think that narrative, when it starts to creep in, and I would assume here, as we head into March, in the social networks authenticating the validity of these political ads as ads start to heat up. I think that, and some of that is interesting because we know Zuckerberg's gotten out ahead of it already, and they're already thinking about like putting the synthetic mark, to indicate that something has been created with AI. And on Twitter, Elon Musk seems like he's relying on the community. What do they call it? Community posting, the community validating, of just letting the community literally check in on these posts. But I think as that narrative creeps in, that is how we will get clarity on everything that we have talked about in this episode of exactly how the money is going to be transacting. Am I going to be able to donate to these political campaigns in crypto? Seems like absolutely yes. And we're not even going to keep track of it until 2025. We know that for a fact that the IRS doesn't care. So crypto is on the ballot. Bitcoin is in the ballot. You will start to hear that narrative. And then I think the AI generative content, personalized political content delivered one-to-one, generatively created. So the politician may not have ever actually said that. We have seen it a little bit with those robocalls. Like that was the taste. But as that comes full steam ahead, I think we will start to get, I think the, here it is. The, funding on Capitol Hill. We didn't even get there, which is to say there's already a built-in backstop is we've got to get this funding taken care of to keep the government operational. I don't know when the next artificial deadline is, but I guarantee you that's when all this tension that I just described will magically be solved. So we'll see you back here in March when we do it again. Final thoughts from you.
Final thoughts from me is I hope that rover sends one last message in March before it just, just turns off. And wouldn't it be cool if it just, if we get just one last little taste of even rover on its side pulled up piece of ice and there is alien organism in ice and then then there's just a flat line of the rover just so we can bring back around the alien technology knuckleheads so we can have one more summer of them talking about how we're going to use special American alien technologies to solve X, Y, and Z. Because, hey, as long as the IRS isn't looking this year, I feel like people will do and say anything.
Oh, goodness. We will leave it there, and I will see you again next week as we head into March.
Let's do it. Good talking to you. Bye-bye.
That's all the time we have for this episode of Off the Record, On the Rocks. Join us next week for more news on all things Web3. Check, please.